Hey there, everybody. This is Jamin again from Game Show, doing another one of our weekly vloggy type entry things. And this week I wanted to look at two different episodes. This time we're going to respond to other YouTubers. In this case, we're looking at Extra Credits and Idea Channel. Mike, my cousin, my PBS corporate cousin, over at Idea Channel, both did episodes this week on mechanics. Mike asked a specific question: why do we talk about game mechanics? Maybe a little bit too much. And then Extra Credits asked a kind of like a larger question about what role sort of our understanding of games, where it's basically at, and whether, I don't know, our focus on mechanics sometimes overshadows other elements of the medium. A couple of things. I mean, I think that that question, so this is to Mike specifically, and actually to both, I think that question about who is sort of like winning in the court of public opinion in terms of the war between how we understand games as being mechanic-based or being more story-based. Well, for one, this sort of like echoes the sort of larger debate that academics have had about ludology, which is whether or not games are play systems, and narratology, which is whether or not games belong in stories. What I think is interesting is that neither parties, neither Mike nor the folks at Extra Credits, invoked Gone Home or Papers, Please, both of which I think are paragons of blending the two different worlds of story and mechanics. Because I recognize that I think the term mechanics is a little bit of a fuzzy one. But in Gone Home, what you do in the game is how the story is told. It is a game about discovery. So the thing that you do is discovery. In a game like Papers, Please, which places you as an Eastern European border agent, in that case, sort of there's the role of ethical decision-making, which you do through stamping and analyzing people's passports. I think one of the big reasons why we're not seeing more of those types of games is simply because, you know, games are at some level still struggling to figure out what their native storytelling voice ultimately is. I had a conversation with Tom Bissell, who used to be a writer and a journalist, an excellent book called Extra Lives. I featured his writing on our show, and now he's doing writing for a bunch of different kind of big budget games. And he was saying that the writing that he was doing for working in games was fundamentally different from any kind of writing that he had ever done, which I think only speaks to that, how bright the pastures are in terms of where that blending of story and mechanic ultimately exists. One thing I do think that's worth noting is I was speaking to a friend of mine. His name's Charlie Melcher. He runs a company called Melcher Media, and they host a conference called The Future of Storytelling. And one of the things that he was telling me was that in the early days of reading, right, for a long time, people read out loud because the way that writing was constructed in the earliest days of writing and ultimately the printing and things like the printing press is that everything kind of like ran together in one big sentence because they were just these recordings of what people actually said. And it took a bunch of monks to actually include something very basic, which was white spaces, right, to put text on a white background and include spaces between individual words. And that kind of what Charlie calls metaphorical white space kind of set the stage for the Renaissance. It gave people, it loosened their cognitive load, which was that the act of reading suddenly became something that was more enjoyable. It wasn't like just peering through a wall of text. And I think that games are still struggling to figure out what that metaphorical white space is with regard to storytelling in particular games. One other thing I would say to Mike is that, I think one of the big reasons that we focus on mechanics over, say, story is in large part because I think that game makers and also the public for a long time regarded the act of making games as a purely mechanical and technical activity. And so really what made games obviously is systems-based, it's a systems-based medium, but I think also the people who are making these types of games didn't necessarily place a high value in terms of having people in the room who could tell good stories. That's a relatively recent development. But I think we do still think of games as a technical product. And I think that's something that we're slowly working ourselves out of. One of the things that is still missing in terms of our understanding of what games are and how they function and why we sort of lean on mechanics is that literacy for a medium starts at the most basic level, which is school. And so, certainly in the early days of film, people didn't understand things like mise-en-scène or jump cuts. These were all sort of new techniques that were developed. And one of the ways in which you develop those understandings of the medium is because you do them in school. We take music class, and that gives us an appreciation for excellence in music. We take art class, that gives us an appreciation for excellence in art. We write as we have a writing class. Obviously, you learn grammar and literature and how to design a good essay, and that gives you an appreciation when you go to English class. It gives you an appreciation for how that process works. I really think until we have that for games, fortunately a lot of this stuff is happening on YouTube, thank goodness, but until I think school systems incorporate game design as something that's learned at a fundamental level, I think some of these deeper understandings in terms of what the difference between mechanics and story and the relationship between those two, until that really happens, I think we'll be all out of luck. In any case, you should watch both episodes. I will link to them in the doobly-doo, and I will see you all next week.